They said the easiest person to ignore in Dante Rossi's empire was the quiet Omega in the finance department. Ezra had no powerful family behind him, no expensive scent, no polished charm that made alphas turn their heads. His pheromone was so faint that most people assumed he barely had one at all. In the brutal hierarchy of the underworld, that made him worse than poor. It made him useless. And Ezra had learned to survive by letting people believe exactly that. He worked on the 37th floor of Rossi Logistics, a spotless glass tower that looked legitimate from the outside and moved blood money through half the city from the inside. On paper, it shipped medical supplies, luxury cars, and construction equipment. Beneath the paperwork, it moved weapons, cash, and favors for the most feared alpha in the city. Ezra was not supposed to notice any of that. He was supposed to sit quietly behind his old computer, check invoices, drink cheap coffee, and leave before anyone remembered his name. But numbers had always spoken louder to him than people did. Numbers did not posture, threaten, or smile with a knife hidden behind the teeth. So when $3 million disappeared through a chain of fake vendors, Ezra noticed. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Then he traced it through 4 shell accounts, 2 ghost contracts, and a dead shipping route that had not existed for 9 months. By midnight, rain was crawling down the office windows. The cleaning staff had gone home. Ezra was still sitting under fluorescent lights with a cold cup of noodles beside his keyboard. He printed the ledgers, marked the false transfers in yellow, and leaned back with tired eyes. Someone inside Dante's organization was stealing from him. Ezra should have walked away. A poor Omega with no protection did not survive by pointing at a mafia leak. But if the missing money stayed attached to his audit signature, he would be the one blamed when the Alpha came looking. And Dante always came looking. The elevator opened with a soft chime at 12:17 a.m. Ezra did not look up at first. He heard the steps before he saw the man. Expensive shoes. Controlled pace. More than one person. Then the air changed. It grew heavier, sharper, filled with the kind of alpha pressure that made most Omegas lower their eyes before they even understood why. The 2 guards who entered first were armed, but Ezra barely glanced at them. His eyes moved to the man behind them. Dante Rossi. Everyone in the company knew his name, even those who pretended they did not. He was not simply the owner. He was the center of the entire machine. An alpha whose silence could ruin families, whose approval could raise men to power, and whose anger had buried stronger people than Ezra. Dante stopped in front of Ezra's desk. His gaze moved from the ledgers to the cup noodles, then to Ezra's face. "You're still here." Ezra swallowed the last bite of noodles because wasting food felt more offensive than dying, then wiped his mouth with a tissue and answered calmly. "I was correcting a discrepancy." One of the guards gave a humorless laugh. Dante did not. "A discrepancy," he repeated. Ezra slid the highlighted ledger across the desk. 3,200,000 over 18 months. Whoever built the route knew your internal approval codes, but they got lazy with the vendor timestamps. The same false supplier was paid twice before the account existed. The room went quiet. The guards looked at Dante, waiting for a reaction. Ezra kept his hands visible on the desk. He knew what men with guns like to assume. He also knew fear only encouraged them. Dante picked up the ledger and scanned the first page, then the second. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "You found this alone?" "Yes." "Why didn't you report it earlier?" "I found it tonight." Dante studied him for a long moment. "You understand what company you work for?" Ezra glanced at the armed men near the door. "I figured it out around the 3rd fake customs route." The guns helped confirm it. One guard stepped forward, offended, but Dante lifted one hand and stopped him without looking away from Ezra. Then Dante leaned closer, placing both hands on the desk. His alpha pheromone pressed down harder, deliberate. This time it was a warning. Test. A force meant to make Ezra tremble, confess, or break. Ezra felt it, of course. The pressure crawled over his skin, and tightened the back of his throat. But years of cheap suppressants had dulled his body's reactions until even fear felt far away. He held Dante's gaze and pushed the ledger closer. If you want to kill me, do it after you read page 7. That's where the real leak starts. For the first time, Dante looked genuinely interested. Most people begged when trapped in a room with him. Most Omegas panicked before he even raised his voice. But Ezra simply sat there, tired, underpaid, and irritated that murder might interrupt his work. Dante took the ledger. Name, Ezra. Last name, none that matters. Dante studied him for several seconds longer than necessary. Then he turned to his guards. Find the account owner. Quietly, the men left at once. Ezra expected Dante to follow them. Instead, the Alpha remained in the office, flipping through the pages Ezra had marked. Rain tapped against the glass behind him. The entire city looked blurred and distant beyond the windows. You're not afraid of me, Dante said. Ezra gave a small, tired smile. I'm afraid of rent, medical bills, and being framed for rich men's crimes. You're dangerous, but you're also losing money. I found it. You're welcome. Something almost like amusement crossed Dante's face, but it vanished quickly. 3 weeks passed after that night. The man stealing from Dante disappeared from the organization. No announcement was made. No public scandal followed. The company records were corrected. The fake vendors were erased. Ezra's department received a vague warning about internal compliance. Ezra thought that would be the end of it. It was not. Dante began watching him. Not openly. Never clumsily. But Ezra noticed the signs. A new security camera outside his office. A black car parked across from his apartment. The sudden transfer of his worst supervisor. The quiet removal of anyone who tried to bury extra work on his desk. Dante was investigating him. Ezra should have been terrified. Instead, he was practical. If Dante wanted him dead, he would already be dead. If Dante wanted to use him, then Ezra needed to understand the price before the offer came. It came on a cold evening, just as Ezra returned to his old apartment with a plastic bag of discounted groceries. Dante was waiting outside his door. He looked impossibly out of place in the narrow hallway, surrounded by peeling paint, broken mailboxes, and the smell of instant food from neighboring rooms. Ezra stopped 3 steps away. You could have called. Dante's eyes lowered to the grocery bag, then returned to his face. I needed to see where you live. That sounds like something a stalker would say. I had you investigated. That sounds worse. Dante did not deny it. You have no family protection. No faction ties. No debt to any rival house. And no loyalty to anyone in my world. Ezra tightened his grip on the bag. That's usually called being alone. It makes you valuable. Ezra's face did not change, but his chest tightened. There it was. The price. Dante looked at him with the same calm he had worn in the office, but this time there was something more dangerous beneath it. Not threat. Decision. The council wants me bonded. They want an Omega beside me to make my position look stable. Every candidate they send is a spy, a trap, or a future knife at my throat. Ezra stared at him. And you came to me because I'm too poor to stab properly? I came to you because you are brilliant, unaffiliated, and the only Omega I have met who can stand in front of me without lowering his head. The hallway seemed to shrink around them. Ezra let out a quiet breath. What exactly are you asking? Dante's gaze did not move. Marry me. Ezra went still. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, low and heavy. Dante continued, voice calm and merciless. They will mock you. They will call you weak. They will say I chose a worthless Omega because I could not control a real one. But in my house, no one will touch you. In my empire, you will have power. And in return, you will help me find every hidden knife before it reaches my back. Ezra should have refused. He should have shut the door, changed his name, and run before sunrise. Instead, he looked at the Alpha standing in the ruin of his ordinary life and understood something terrifying. Dante did not see him as beautiful. He did not see him as helpless. He saw him as useful. And for now, that was the safest kind of desire Ezra knew. Dante held out his hand. "Choose carefully, Ezra." Ezra looked at that hand for a long moment. Then he asked softly, "And if I say no?" Dante's answer came without hesitation. "Then I'll walk away. But the people who stole from me know you found them. I may be the only monster currently offering you protection." Ezra's fingers tightened around the plastic bag until it rustled in the silence. At last, he gave a faint, unreadable smile. "Then I suppose we should discuss the terms of our marriage." The news spread through the underworld before the marriage papers were even signed. Dante Rossi, the most feared alpha in the city, was marrying a nobody Omega from his accounting department. The reactions were brutal. Some thought it was a joke. Others assumed Ezra was secretly connected to a rival family. The cruelest rumors claimed Dante had chosen him because no high-ranking Omega would willingly stay beside a man like him. Ezra heard all of it. He simply kept working. 3 weeks after agreeing to the contract marriage, Ezra stood in the center of Dante's penthouse suite while staff moved expensive clothes into his closet like they were preparing for a royal ceremony instead of a business arrangement. The entire place looked cold and immaculate. All black marble, glass walls, and quiet luxury. Nothing in it felt lived in. Dante walked past him while adjusting his cuffs. "You'll need clothing appropriate for public events." Ezra looked at the endless racks. "I owned 3 sweaters before this." I noticed. "Is that judgmental?" It was observational. Ezra glanced at him. "You're difficult to talk to. And yet you keep answering me." That became the rhythm of their lives. Dry conversations. Quiet dinners. Late nights working across from each other in a massive study, while the city glowed behind glass windows. Dante rarely spoke unnecessarily, but Ezra slowly realized the Alpha noticed everything. If Ezra skipped meals while working, food appeared beside his laptop 30 minutes later. If he fell asleep on the sofa surrounded by documents, a blanket ended up covering him before morning. No one acknowledged those things aloud. That somehow made them feel more intimate. The first time Ezra attended a mafia gathering as Dante's bonded Omega, the room practically stopped breathing when they entered. The event was held in an enormous private ballroom, dripping with crystal lights and expensive perfume. Alphas dominated the room in tailored suits, while elegant Omegas stood beside them like decorative trophies. The moment Dante stepped inside with Ezra at his side, whispers spread through the crowd like poison. Ezra could feel the stares immediately. Not because he was beautiful, because he was disappointing. No seductive presence. No polished smile meant to soothe alpha egos. He looked calm, quiet, and unimpressed by the room around him, which somehow irritated people even more. "You're handling this well," Dante murmured quietly as they walked deeper into the ballroom. "I've been poor my entire life. Rich people aren't nearly as scary as they think they are." Dante's mouth almost twitched upward. Almost. The first hour passed tolerably. Men approached Dante with fake smiles and hidden agendas, while others openly stared at Ezra like he was some strange animal standing beside a predator. Then Crescent arrived. Crescent was exactly the type of Omega the underworld expected beside Dante, elegant, expensive, beautiful in a polished, untouchable way that made people stop and stare when he entered a room. Rumors said Crescent had wanted Dante for years. Judging by the look in his eyes, the rumors were true. "So this is the Omega everyone is talking about," Crescent said smoothly, champagne glass balanced between elegant fingers. "I expected someone more impressive." Ezra took a slow sip of water. "That must be disappointing for you." A nearby alpha choked on his drink, trying not to laugh. Crescent's smile tightened slightly. "You're calmer than I expected. I get that a lot. You know people are laughing at you, right?" Ezra set his glass down carefully. "People laughed when I bought instant noodles in bulk, too. I survived." Dante had stepped away briefly for a conversation with another family head, But Ezra could still feel the Alpha's presence somewhere across the room, like pressure lingering against his skin. Crescent leaned closer. "You really think this marriage means anything?" he asked quietly. "Dante didn't choose you because he wanted you. He chose you because you were convenient." The words hit harder than Ezra expected, because part of him already believed them. Ezra kept his expression neutral anyway. "And yet I'm still the one standing beside him." For the first time, Crescent's composure cracked. The Omega's pheromones shifted sharply, sweet and aggressive at once. Ezra recognized the move immediately. It was subtle enough that most people in the room would miss it, but Crescent was deliberately pushing pheromones toward him to trigger discomfort. A warning. A humiliation tactic. Normally it would have worked. But Ezra's suppressants had muted most pheromone responses years ago. So instead of reacting dramatically, he simply blinked once and looked mildly annoyed. Unfortunately, that only made Crescent angrier. The pheromone pressure intensified. Several nearby Omegas shifted uneasily. One Alpha turned his head immediately toward the disturbance. Ezra's pulse finally quickened slightly, not because of fear, but because Crescent was reckless enough to do this publicly. If the situation escalated too far, every Alpha instinct in the room could become unstable. Then the entire ballroom went silent. The pressure rolling off him was terrifying. Pure Alpha dominance flooded the air, hard enough to make nearby conversations stop instantly. Several people physically stepped backward without realizing it. Crescent froze. Dante walked directly toward them, expression calm in the most dangerous possible way. "What?" he asked softly. "Is happening here?" No one answered. Crescent recovered first. "We were only talking." Dante's eyes moved to Ezra briefly. "You're uncomfortable." Ezra hesitated. That tiny pause was enough. In one smooth movement, Dante grabbed Crescent by the throat and slammed him backward against the marble pillar behind him. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. Nobody moved. Nobody was insane enough to interfere. Dante's voice remained horrifyingly calm. "You released pheromones against my Omega. In public." Crescent's face had gone pale. "I didn't." "You did." The Alpha pressure intensified again. Ezra could actually hear people backing away around them. For the first time all evening, genuine fear crossed Crescent's face. Dante leaned slightly closer. "If you ever try it again, I won't embarrass you in front of witnesses. I'll bury you quietly." The ballroom stayed dead silent. Then Dante released him abruptly. Crescent stumbled backward, shaken badly enough that he nearly dropped his drink. Dante turned away from him immediately, like he no longer mattered. Then, in front of the entire underworld, he stepped beside Ezra and pulled him against his chest. Possessively. The reaction around the room shifted instantly. Not mockery anymore. Warning. Claim. Protection. Ezra felt dozens of eyes on him while Dante's hand rested firmly against his waist. "You didn't need to do that," Ezra said quietly once the music cautiously resumed. "Yes, I did. You caused a scene." "Good." Ezra stared for a moment longer than he intended. The frightening part was not the violence. It was the fact that Dante had noticed Ezra's discomfort from across a crowded ballroom before Ezra himself fully acknowledged it. That realization stayed with him the entire night. Later, long after the event ended, they rode home together through empty streets washed silver by rain. Ezra sat beside Dante in the back seat, exhausted from hours of political smiles and whispered insults. At some point during the drive, fatigue finally won. Ezra's head slowly tipped sideways until it rested against Dante's shoulder. The Alpha went completely still. The driver glanced nervously into the mirror, probably expecting Dante to shove him away. Instead, Dante quietly said, "Drive slower." Ezra never even realized he had fallen asleep. When the car finally stopped beneath the penthouse tower, Dante looked down at the Omega resting against him. Ezra's breathing was slow and even. Suppressant scent faint beneath the colder city air. Then something changed. A soft trace of pheromone slipped free unexpectedly. It lasted barely 2 seconds, but it hit Dante like a blade through the chest. Not weak, not dull, terrifyingly rich, warm, addictive, and deep enough to send raw alpha instinct violently awake inside him. Dante's entire body locked for one dangerous second. Every possessive instinct he had surged forward, hard enough to drown reason completely. Mine. The thought arrived instantly and viciously. Ezra shifted slightly in his sleep, completely unaware of what he had just done. Dante stared down at him in silence while his pulse hammered once, hard enough to hurt. Then, very slowly, Dante reached up and loosened his tie, like the air inside the car had suddenly become suffocating. For the first time in years, the Alpha realized he might already be losing control. Dante stopped sleeping properly after that night in the car. At first, he blamed stress. Rival families were growing restless. Territory negotiations were becoming more aggressive. The council kept pushing him about heirs and stability. Any Alpha in his position would be under pressure. But deep down, he knew the truth had nothing to do with politics. It was Ezra. More specifically, it was the memory of that scent. For barely 2 seconds, Ezra's suppressants had slipped, and Dante had caught a glimpse of the Omega hidden underneath years of chemical suppression. Since then, the Alpha had not been able to get it out of his head. It lingered everywhere now. In the study when Ezra sat across from him, reviewing numbers with tired eyes behind thin glasses. In the hallway after Ezra passed by, wearing one of his oversized sweaters. Even on the pillows inside Dante's own bedroom after Ezra occasionally fell asleep there while working late. The worst part was that Ezra still had no idea. Or maybe he did. Dante watched him more carefully over the following weeks and noticed the signs immediately. Ezra took suppressants too often, sometimes twice the recommended dosage. He always kept painkillers nearby. His hands occasionally trembled after long work sessions, especially during stressful meetings. One night, Dante walked into the kitchen past midnight and found Ezra leaning heavily against the counter, breathing unevenly. "You're awake," Ezra murmured tiredly. Dante's eyes dropped to the open suppressant packet beside him. "How many did you take today?" Ezra immediately straightened. "Enough." That wasn't an answer. "It's not your business. You're shaking. I'm tired. You're destroying your body." Ezra laughed quietly at that, but there was no humor in it. "My body stopped belonging to me a long time ago." Something dark shifted behind Dante's eyes. The Alpha hated that sentence more than he should have. Before he could respond, Ezra picked up his glass of water and walked past him toward the hallway. Dante caught his wrist, gently but firmly. The moment their skin touched, Ezra froze. Not because of fear. Dante's pheromones softened instantly. That had never happened before. Alpha instincts were supposed to sharpen around Omegas, not calm. Yet every time Dante touched Ezra lately, his body reacted less like a predator and more like someone searching for something he could not name. "You need a doctor," Dante said quietly. "I need people to stop trying to control what I am." Dante's grip loosened slightly. Ezra pulled away and disappeared down the hallway before the conversation could become something more dangerous. But the distance between them changed after that. It became quieter, closer. Ezra started falling asleep in the study more often, and Dante stopped pretending he minded. Sometimes they worked until dawn in complete silence, city lights reflecting across the glass walls around them. Other nights, Dante would simply sit there, watching Ezra organize files while soft music played somewhere in the penthouse. It felt disturbingly domestic, and neither of them knew what to do about it. One evening, Ezra finally fell asleep at the study desk itself, forehead resting against scattered financial reports. Dante looked up from his laptop and stared at him for a long moment. The Omega looked exhausted, dark circles beneath his eyes, suppressant patches visible beneath the loose collar of his shirt, fingers still loosely holding a pen even in sleep. Dante stood slowly and walked around the desk. For several seconds, he simply looked down at Ezra, quietly breathing beneath the dim light. Then his gaze lowered to the exposed side of Ezra's neck. Even muted by suppressants, that scent pulled at something deep inside him. Dangerously deep. Dante leaned down before he fully thought through the decision. His lips brushed softly against Ezra's temple first, then lower, a careful kiss near the corner of his mouth. The moment lasted less than a second. Ezra's eyes opened immediately. Dante froze. For the first time since they met, the Alpha actually looked caught off guard. Ezra blinked sleepily up at him, their faces still too close together. Dante started pulling back at once. Instead, Ezra's hand caught lightly against his tie. The movement was small, hesitant, but intentional. Then Ezra tugged him down again and kissed him properly. Slow, careful, warm. Enough to make Dante's pulse slam violently against his ribs. The kiss was not desperate or heated. It was worse. It was gentle. Dante's hand moved instinctively to Ezra's waist, fingers tightening slightly against the fabric of his sweater, while Ezra kissed him like someone trying to understand whether safety could actually exist. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke immediately. Ezra looked away first. "This complicates things," he murmured quietly. Dante's voice came lower than usual. A little late for that. Ezra laughed softly under his breath, and for the first time since entering Dante's world, he looked genuinely relaxed. That should have been enough warning. Because happiness in Dante's empire never lasted long. 2 days later, Vayner arrived at the penthouse carrying medical files and a deeply unpleasant expression. Ezra was still asleep when Dante entered the private office. "What happened?" Dante asked immediately. Vayner placed the documents on the desk. "I finally got access to the suppressants Ezra has been using." Dante's expression darkened. "And military grade?" Vayner leaned forward slightly. "Those things aren't meant for long-term use. They're designed to completely bury pheromone output temporarily during emergencies. Prolonged exposure damages the nervous system." Dante looked down at the report slowly. "Internal damage, hormonal instability, severe physical deterioration." One line near the bottom caught his attention immediately. Potential fatality risk if continued. Dante's jaw tightened hard enough to hurt. He knows. He has to. The Alpha said nothing for several seconds. Then he stood abruptly and walked out. Ezra was sitting alone near the massive living room windows when Dante found him. Snow drifted quietly outside beyond the glass, coating the city in pale silver. Ezra looked up immediately. One glance at Dante's face, and his expression shifted. "You found out." Dante stopped several feet away. "How long?" Ezra stayed silent. "How long?" "Years." Rage hit Dante instantly. Not violent rage. Worse. Fear. "You kept taking them knowing what they're doing to you?" Ezra looked back toward the snow outside. "I didn't have a choice. There is always a choice." A bitter smile touched Ezra's mouth. "That's easy for an Alpha to say." Dante moved closer. "Explain." Ezra finally looked at him directly. "You know what powerful Omegas become in this world?" he asked quietly. "Assets. Breeding stock. Possessions." His fingers curled slightly against his sleeve. The moment people smell something rare, they stop seeing a person. Dante stared at him in silence. "So I erased it," Ezra continued softly. "I made myself forgettable. Weak. Safe. You're killing yourself. At least I remain mine." The words hit harder than Dante expected. For a moment, neither moved. Then Dante said quietly, "Do you really think I would chain you?" Ezra's expression finally cracked slightly. "I don't know," he admitted. That's the problem. Something painful settled heavily between them. Dante stepped closer again until only inches separated them. "Look at me." Ezra hesitated before obeying. Dante's voice lowered. I'm trying very hard not to lose control where you are concerned. Ezra's breath caught faintly. But if you keep destroying yourself like this, Dante continued, I won't survive it calmly. The honesty in that sentence felt almost frightening. Ezra looked away first. And that was when Dante finally understood something dangerous. This Omega was no longer simply under his protection. Ezra had become the one thing capable of ruining him completely. That same night, another man sat in a dark room across the city, listening to reports about Dante and his Omega. Draker's expression twisted coldly as photographs slid across the table. Dante shielding him during public events. Dante watching him when he thought nobody noticed. Weakness. Draker leaned back slowly. Years ago, the council had considered him the future leader, before Dante took power instead. Since then, Draker had waited patiently for the perfect fracture in Dante's empire. And now he had found it. An Omega. One quiet Omega had finally given the untouchable Alpha something to lose. Draker smiled slowly in the darkness. Prepare the team, he said softly. Outside the penthouse windows, snow continued falling silently across the city while Ezra slept in Dante's bed for the first time, without realizing the war had already begun. The glass estate stood alone beside the frozen lake, like something carved from ice and shadow. Massive black steel beams framed endless walls of reinforced glass, allowing the storm outside to surround the house from every angle. Snow fell heavily across the forest, burying the road leading back toward the city. Inside, the estate remained silent except for the low crackling of the fireplace and the soft hum of hidden heating vents beneath the floor. Ezra sat curled near the living room window with a book resting open on his lap. Dante stood across the room, speaking quietly into his phone, one hand pressed against the cold glass while snow battered the other side. Something was wrong. Ezra noticed it immediately from the tension in Dante's shoulders. The Alpha ended the call sharply. The council changed the meeting location. I have to leave for a few hours. Ezra closed his book slowly. Tonight, it's a power move. Dante grabbed his coat from the chair nearby. Draker is pushing too hard lately. If I refuse the meeting, it makes me look weak. Ezra disliked the feeling crawling up his spine. The storm outside had already become dangerous. Visibility was nearly gone beneath the snow and darkness. Then don't go. Dante's eyes shifted toward him for a second. Neither spoke. That was new, too. A month ago, Ezra would never have voiced concern so openly. Now the words came naturally. Dante walked closer and brushed his fingers lightly against Ezra's jaw. I'll be back before dawn. The touch lasted only a moment, but Ezra still felt the warmth after Dante pulled away. 3 guards remained behind at the estate after Dante left. Vaynar had personally arranged the security team, and normally that would have been enough to calm Ezra. Tonight it did not. The storm worsened over the next hour. Wind slammed violently against the glass walls while snow swallowed the forest completely. The estate felt isolated from the rest of the world, floating somewhere deep inside endless white darkness. Ezra tried reading again. Then the lights went out. Everything dropped into absolute black silence. Ezra froze immediately. Not panic. Recognition. Years ago, his father had taught him something important. People fear darkness because they wait helplessly inside it. Hunters learn to move with it. The emergency backup system should have activated within 3 seconds. It did not. Ezra stood slowly. Somewhere deeper inside the estate, metal clanged softly. Then silence returned. Someone had manually killed the power. Ezra moved quietly toward the kitchen, bare feet nearly silent against the heated floor. Moonlight reflecting off the snow outside provided just enough visibility through the glass walls to navigate the darkness. He reached the kitchen entrance and stopped instantly. One of the guards lay collapsed beside the marble island. Blood spread black across the floor beneath his throat. Ezra stared for one long second. Then the old instincts buried inside him began waking up. Not fear. Calculation. How many? Where? armed. The sound of the front security door unlocking echoed faintly through the estate. Ezra moved immediately. No hesitation. He slipped silently into the dark hallway just as three figures entered through the main entrance, wearing white tactical gear, almost invisible against the storm outside. Professional. Not random assassins. One of them spoke quietly through a radio. Target Alpha is absent. Secondary target confirmed inside. Ezra's expression changed slightly. Secondary target. Me? Something cold settled inside his chest. The assassins separated efficiently, weapons raised as they swept through the lower level. Ezra stayed hidden in the shadows between the hallway and staircase, breathing slow and controlled. The years disappeared. The city disappeared. Suddenly, he was a child again, listening to his father explain how larger predators survived, not through speed, but through patience. One assassin broke away toward the kitchen. Ezra waited until the man passed the dark alcove beside him. Then he moved fast. One hand grabbed the back of the assassin's tactical vest while all his body weight slammed forward violently. The man lost balance instantly, crashing sideways into the marble wall. Before he could react, Ezra ripped the silenced handgun from his grip and smashed the weapon hard against the side of the man's helmet. A sickening crack echoed softly. The assassin dropped immediately. Ezra caught the body before it hit the floor loudly. Years of suppressants and soft clothing had hidden one important fact from the world. Ezra was not fragile. He stripped the gun free and checked the magazine automatically. Loaded. Good. A voice crackled through the dead man's radio. Report. Ezra crushed the earpiece beneath his heel. Upstairs, footsteps changed direction immediately. They knew something was wrong now. Ezra slipped silently beneath the floating staircase, just as flashlight beams began cutting through the darkness upstairs. Snow reflected through the glass walls in pale silver flashes while the storm screamed outside like an animal. Another assassin descended cautiously toward the lower level. Ezra watched his movements carefully. Disciplined. Experienced. But nervous now. Good. The man swept his weapon toward the kitchen first. Fatal mistake. Ezra stepped from the shadows behind him and drove the stolen knife upward beneath the edge of the tactical vest. The blade punched deep. A strangled gasp escaped the assassin before Ezra slammed him hard against the staircase wall, muffling the collapse. Blood spread hot across Ezra's sleeve. The smell hit him immediately, and suddenly his suppressants began failing. Pain exploded through his chest first, then heat. Ezra staggered slightly. No, not now. A faint scent escaped into the cold air around him. Warm. Dangerous. Rich enough to make alpha instinct spiral violently. Upstairs, the third assassin froze. What the hell? His voice sounded wrong now. Distracted. Breathing harder. Ezra realized the problem instantly. The pheromones. The stress and adrenaline were destroying the suppressants inside his system, and now an omega scent, powerful enough to drive alphas insane, was leaking into the estate. The final assassin descended the stairs quickly, movements losing precision. Come out, he snarled. Now. Ezra backed slowly through the darkness toward the living room. Glass walls surrounded him from every side, reflecting fragments of moonlight and blood across polished floors. The assassin followed aggressively now, composure collapsing beneath instinct. Then he saw Ezra clearly for the first time. The Omega stood barefoot in the darkness with blood staining one sleeve and cold eyes completely empty of fear. For a split second, the assassin hesitated. Ezra used it immediately. He fired once. The bullet tore cleanly through the man's shoulder before Ezra slammed forward physically, crashing both of them through the glass divider beside the fireplace. Shards exploded everywhere. The assassin screamed and grabbed for his secondary weapon. Ezra caught the man's wrist, twisted violently, and drove the combat knife directly into his throat. Silence. Only the storm remained. Ezra stayed kneeling there for several seconds, breathing hard, while blood spread across shattered glass beneath him. The suppressants had completely failed now. Fragrance flooded the ruined estate uncontrollably. Then headlights appeared outside. A vehicle tore through the snow toward the estate entrance. The front doors slammed open seconds later. Dante stopped mid-step. The entire lower level looked like a massacre. Broken glass, bodies, blood across the white floor. And at the center of it all sat Ezra, trembling slightly beneath the shattered lights with a gun in one hand and blood running down his arm. Dante's face lost all color. For one horrifying second, he thought Ezra was dying. Then Ezra slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met across the destroyed estate, and Dante finally understood the terrifying truth. The Omega everyone thought needed protection had just slaughtered trained assassins alone in the dark. Dante killed the engine of the car himself when they finally returned to the city 2 days later. He did not trust anyone else touching Ezra, not the guards, not the medics, not even Vanar. The attack at the glass estate had changed something inside him permanently. The entire ride home, Dante kept one hand wrapped tightly around Ezra's wrist, like he needed physical proof the Omega was still alive. Ezra noticed it, of course, but said nothing. His body hurt too much to waste energy arguing. The knife wound near his ribs had been stitched roughly at the estate before dawn, but the suppressant crash was worse. Without the chemicals burying his pheromones, Ezra's entire system felt unstable. He crawled beneath his skin in waves that came without warning, leaving him exhausted and disoriented. And Dante could smell all of it. The moment they entered the penthouse, Dante dismissed everyone. Vanar hesitated briefly. Dante, he should be monitored. Out. The Alpha's voice carried enough cold force to end the conversation immediately. A few seconds later, the penthouse fell silent. Ezra sat carefully on the edge of the enormous bed while Dante opened the medical kit nearby. Neither spoke for a while. Snow drifted quietly beyond the glass windows overlooking the city. Finally, Dante knelt in front of him. The movement startled Ezra more than he expected. Dante Rossi did not kneel for anyone. Yet there he was, calmly rolling bandages between his fingers while blood from Ezra's earlier stitches stained the cuffs of his expensive black shirt. "You're bleeding again," Dante said quietly. Ezra looked away. Occupational hazard. Dante's jaw tightened. Very gently, he lifted Ezra's shirt enough to expose the stitched wound along his side. Bruising spread dark across pale skin beneath the bandages. "You should have stayed upstairs," Dante murmured. "They would have killed me anyway. I would have come back." Ezra let out a tired laugh. "You almost didn't." Silence settled heavily between them. Dante cleaned the wound carefully, but Ezra noticed something strange almost immediately. The Alpha's hands were shaking. Barely noticeable, but shaking. Ezra stared quietly for a moment before speaking. "You're angry." "No. You're terrifyingly bad at lying." Dante tied off the fresh bandages harder than necessary. Then, finally, he looked up. "I left you there." The words came low and rough. Ezra blinked once. Most of the time, Dante's feelings hid beneath silence, control, or violence. But right now, there was something raw in his expression that Ezra had never seen before. "I knew something felt wrong," Dante admitted quietly. "And I still walked away. You didn't know they'd attack." "I should have." Ezra studied him carefully. This was not guilt over damaged territory or wounded pride. Dante genuinely looked shaken by the thought of almost losing him. That realization settled strangely inside Ezra's chest. Dante exhaled slowly and rested his forehead briefly against Ezra's knee. The position felt so intimate it almost hurt. "When I walked into that estate," Dante's voice lowered further, "I thought I was too late." Ezra's fingers twitched slightly against the blanket. Then slowly, awkwardly, he reached out and touched Dante's hair. The Alpha went completely still beneath his hand. "I'm alive," Ezra said softly. "For now." Ezra frowned faintly. "That's dramatic. You were sitting in blood surrounded by corpses." That's fair. A quiet sound escaped Dante then, not quite a laugh, not quite relief. For the first time since the attack, the tension in the room loosened slightly. The following days became strangely quiet. Dante canceled meetings, delayed negotiations, refused public appearances. Rumors spread immediately through the underworld that the Alpha had gone unstable after the attack. The rumors were not entirely wrong. Dante barely let Ezra out of his sight. If Ezra worked late in the study, Dante stayed nearby, reading reports beside him. If Ezra fell asleep on the sofa, he woke up covered carefully in blankets. Every meal appeared before Ezra had to ask for it. First, Ezra found it excessive. Then he realized something dangerous. He had started expecting it. One night, after hours buried in financial records tracing Drakk's hidden accounts, Ezra finally leaned back against the sofa with exhausted eyes. "You've been staring at me for 20 minutes. Dante did not even pretend innocence. "You look pale." "I almost died." "That isn't reassuring." Ezra looked toward him slowly. Dante sat across the room in loose black clothes instead of his usual formal suits, one arm resting against the leather chair, while his eyes remained locked on Ezra with exhausting intensity. "You've changed," Ezra murmured. Dante's expression barely shifted. "So have you." The room fell quiet again. Outside, rain slid down the massive windows in silver streaks. Then suddenly, pain twisted through Ezra's body, hard enough to steal his breath. He doubled over instantly. Dante moved before thinking. What happened? Ezra gripped the edge of the sofa tightly, breathing unevenly. The heat flooding his body felt wrong. Too hot. Too sharp. No suppressants remained in his system anymore, and now everything buried for years was beginning to surface violently. "Dante," Ezra whispered hoarsely. The Alpha froze. The scent filling the room had changed completely. Stronger. Richer. Dangerous. Dante's pupils widened instantly. Every alpha instinct inside him surged awake so fast it physically hurt. Ezra stumbled backward off the sofa. "Don't." But his knees nearly gave out beneath him. Dante caught him automatically. The moment their bodies touched fully, both of them inhaled sharply. Pheromones exploded through the room. Ezra's entire body trembled. "No," he whispered immediately. "No." Fear. Real fear. Dante felt it instantly. Ezra shoved weakly against his chest. "I can't do this. You're in heat." "I know what I am." "That isn't what I meant." Ezra looked up at him then, eyes glassy with panic. "You don't understand." His voice shook. "If this happens now, it won't be a choice anymore." The words sliced through Dante hard enough to restore clarity instantly. Slowly, painfully, the Alpha forced his instincts back under control. Then he wrapped both arms around Ezra carefully and pulled him against his chest. "That's not happening," Dante said quietly. Ezra stared at him in confusion. Dante's jaw tightened visibly from restraint. Every instinct in his body screamed to bite, claim, mark, keep. Instead, he only held Ezra closer. "When you truly want me," Dante whispered against his hair, voice rough with control, "then I'll mark you." Ezra's breathing caught sharply. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, very slowly, Ezra's fingers closed weakly around the front of Dante's shirt. Trust. Small. Terrifying. Real. Dante felt it immediately. And somehow that nearly destroyed his control more than the heat itself. Hours later, Ezra finally fell asleep against Dante's chest while rain continued falling quietly beyond the windows. But Dante remained awake. One hand rested protectively against Ezra's back while the other held a tablet filled with financial records glowing coldly in the darkness. Drakk's hidden transactions. Secret accounts. Offshore transfers. Ezra's unfinished investigation. Dante looked down at the sleeping Omega in his arms, then back toward the screen. Very softly, almost to himself, he murmured, "They should have killed me when they had the chance." By the time the emergency commission meeting began, the entire underworld already knew something had changed. Not just inside Dante's organization. Inside Dante himself. The alpha who once ruled through cold distance and calculated fear now walked through the city like a man carrying a loaded weapon beneath his ribs. Since the attack at the Glass Estate, rival families had started disappearing quietly. Warehouses connected to Drakkar burned overnight. Hidden accounts vanished. Entire payment routes collapsed without warning. Nobody could figure out how. Only Dante knew the truth. Ezra was dismantling an empire from their living room. The meeting took place on the top floor of a heavily guarded private tower overlooking the city's skyline. Rain hammered against the dark windows while armed guards lined the entrance halls outside the commission chamber. Inside, the heads of the major families sat around a long black table, waiting for Dante. Drakkar sat near the center, relaxed, confident, still believing he controlled the board. Then the doors opened. The entire room went silent. Dante entered first, wearing black from head to toe, expression unreadable as always. But nobody focused on him for long, because Ezra walked in beside him. No tired office worker aura. No quiet Omega trying to disappear into the background. Ezra wore a perfectly tailored black suit with silver detailing near the collar. Dark hair pushed back neatly away from his face. The faint scar near his neck remained visible beneath the sharp lighting of the room. And for the first time since entering the mafia world, Ezra did not look hidden at all. He looked dangerous. More importantly, Dante let everyone see it. The alpha pulled out the chair beside him personally before Ezra sat down. Small gesture. Massive message. Drakkar's eyes narrowed immediately. Well, he drawled slowly. Looks like the little Omega survived after all. Ezra met his gaze calmly. Disappointing for you, I imagine. Several people at the table immediately looked away. Nobody missed the shift in power anymore. Dante rested one hand lightly against the back of Ezra's chair while the meeting formally began. Territory discussion started first. Trade routes, port control, financial restructuring after recent disruptions. Then Drakkar finally leaned back with fake amusement. Speaking of disruptions, he said casually, someone's been interfering with my overseas accounts lately. Ezra opened a thin black folder in front of him. That would be me. The room stilled instantly. Drakkar's expression hardened. Ezra's voice remained calm and smooth. You made one critical mistake. You hired professionals for the estate attack, but you moved the payment too quickly afterward. He slid several printed documents across the table. Your cleanup transfers crossed 3 shell companies connected to your Eastern shipping division. One of the older alphas grabbed the papers first. His face changed immediately. These account numbers. Authentic. Ezra nodded once. Drakkar laughed suddenly, loud mocking. You think forged paperwork impresses me? Ezra finally looked directly at him. No, he said softly. But bankruptcy probably will. Silence. Ezra pressed a button on the tablet resting beside him. Several phones around a table vibrated simultaneously. One by one, family heads began checking their screens. Expressions shifted. Confusion. Shock. Fear. Ezra folded his hands together calmly. Over the past 11 days, I traced every hidden account connected to your organization, he explained. Then I rerouted the assets through blind trusts across 6 countries. His eyes never left Drakkar. As of this morning, your liquid capital no longer exists. The room exploded. What? You emptied everything? That's impossible. Drakkar slammed both hands against the table, violently enough to rattle the glasses. You lying little. 83 million, Ezra interrupted. Gone. Dante watched silently beside him. And somehow that made everything worse, because he looked proud. Not surprised. Proud. Drakkar's face darkened with genuine panic for the first time. You think money wins wars? Ezra tilted his head slightly. In your case? Yes. The other family heads were already distancing themselves psychologically. Nobody wanted to stand beside a collapsing empire. Ezra continued calmly. Your soldiers haven't been paid. Your offshore routes are frozen. Your bribed customs officers lost their transfers 12 hours ago. He leaned back slightly in his chair. Right now, your entire organization is surviving purely on denial. Drakar's breathing grew heavier. You arrogant Omega. Ezra smiled faintly. You underestimated me too. The insult hit harder because it was true. Every mistake Drakar made began with believing Ezra was harmless. The Alpha moved suddenly. Too suddenly. His hand disappeared inside his jacket, fingers wrapping around a concealed gun. Several people shouted at once. But Dante was faster. The gunshot cracked through the room like thunder. Drakar froze mid-motion. A dark hole appeared cleanly in the center of his forehead. Then his body collapsed backward onto the marble floor. Silence crashed down afterward. Nobody moved. Dante lowered the pistol slowly and slid it back beneath his jacket without visible emotion. Rain hammered harder against the windows behind him. Then the Alpha looked around the room calmly. Does anyone else have an issue with my Omega? Nobody answered. Nobody was stupid enough. Ezra remained seated through the entire thing, completely still despite the dead body bleeding across the floor nearby. That frightened them more than the shooting itself, because they finally understood the truth. Dante was terrifying, but Ezra was the one capable of destroying entire families without firing a single bullet. One by one, the remaining Alphas lowered their gazes. Submission, acknowledgement, fear. Ezra noticed Crescent standing quietly near the back of the room beside several lower-ranking Omegas. The moment their eyes met, Crescent immediately looked down first. No more mockery. No more whispers. Only fear now. Dante extended one hand toward Ezra. Let's go home. Home. The word still felt strange. Ezra placed his hand in Dante's and stood slowly while guards moved to clean the blood from the floor behind them. Nobody tried stopping them as they left the tower together. By midnight, Drakar's remaining territory officially belonged to Dante. By sunrise, the underworld would belong to Ezra too. Rain still covered the city when they returned to the penthouse. The atmosphere felt different now. Quiet. Finished. For the first time in months, there was no immediate threat waiting outside the glass walls surrounding them. Ezra stood near the massive window overlooking the sleeping city while lights reflected softly across the glass. You know, he murmured quietly, they really thought you married a weak Omega. Dante walked up behind him slowly, then wrapped both arms around Ezra's waist. Warm, steady, safe. They were wrong. Ezra leaned back slightly against his chest. I almost was weak, he admitted softly. Dante tightened his hold immediately. No, he said near Ezra's ear. You were alone. The words hit somewhere painfully deep. Ezra closed his eyes briefly. 4 years, he survived by becoming invisible. Forgettable. Small enough that nobody would want to own him. But somehow Dante had looked directly at him from the beginning. Not as a prize. Not as an object. Not as a useful Omega. As Ezra. Dante lowered his head slowly until his forehead rested lightly against the side of Ezra's neck. You still have a choice, he murmured quietly. Even now. Ezra understood immediately. The mark. The bond. Everything. Slowly, Ezra turned in his arms. Then he reached up and pulled Dante down into a kiss. Soft at first. Then deeper. Real. Dante made a rough sound low in his throat, one hand sliding carefully against Ezra's back while years of restraint finally began breaking apart between them. When they separated, Ezra rested his forehead lightly against Dante's. And for the first time since they met, the Omega smiled without fear. I know, he whispered. Then Ezra tilted his head, willingly exposing his throat. And this time, when Dante finally marked him, it was not possession. It was love. That was how the Omega everyone mocked became the man who stood beside the most dangerous alpha in the city. Not as weakness, but as his equal. Extra story. 6 months after the marking, Dante Rossi learned something new about his Omega. Ezra was sick. Not the kind of sick that came with fever or infection. The kind that came from years of suppressant abuse finally catching up with his body. Vayner had warned them both the crash would not be gentle. The hormones suppressed for so long would return like a flood breaking through a dam. Dante just did not expect it to happen at 2 in the morning during a thunderstorm while he was 3 floors away in his private office. The first sign was the scent. It drifted through the penthouse like smoke under a door, subtle at first, then overwhelming. Dante's pen stopped mid-signature. His head lifted. His eyes widened. Ezra. The alpha moved before he finished thinking. His chair scraped backward across the marble floor. His feet carried him down the hallway, past the study, past the kitchen, toward the bedroom where the scent grew thicker with every step. Warm, sweet, desperate. Dante's hand slammed against the bedroom door. It was not locked. Ezra never locked doors, but something made him pause. Control. He had to keep control. Ezra. No answer. Dante pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark except for the lightning flashing through the windows. Rain hammered against the glass. And there, in the center of the massive bed, Ezra lay curled beneath a tangled mess of sheets. His skin glowed pale in the intermittent light. Sweat darkened the collar of his loose shirt. His breathing came in short, uneven gasps. And his scent, his scent, filled the entire room like something alive. Dante's throat went dry. Ezra. Ezra's eyes opened. Glassy, unfocused. But when they found Dante's face, something in them sharpened. Dante. His voice cracked. Something is wrong. Dante stepped closer. Every instinct screamed at him to close the distance, to climb onto that bed, to wrap himself around his Omega and never let go. But he forced himself to stop at the edge of the mattress. Your heat, Dante said quietly. It's starting. Ezra blinked slowly. I don't have heats. Not anymore. I killed them with the suppressants. They're coming back. Ezra's breath hitched. For a moment, genuine fear crossed his face, the same fear Dante had seen during the first heat, back when they were still learning each other, still dancing around what they were becoming. I can't, Ezra whispered. Dante, I can't do this again. You know what happened last time? I couldn't control anything. Dante lowered himself onto the edge of the bed. Slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. You don't have to control anything, he said. That's not how this works anymore. Ezra laughed, a broken, desperate sound. You're an alpha. Your instincts are going to go crazy. My instincts are already crazy. Then why aren't you? Ezra gestured vaguely at the space between them, at the invisible wall Dante had somehow maintained. Why are you still sitting there? Dante's jaw tightened. Because if he moved any closer, he was not sure he could stop. Because Ezra's scent was wrapping around his brain like chains, pulling him towards something primal and consuming. But more than that, because the last time this happened, Ezra had looked at him with panic in his eyes and said, if this happens now, it won't be a choice anymore. Dante had waited then. He could wait now. Because you haven't asked me, Dante said simply. Ezra stared at him. The thunder rolled outside. Rain streaked down the windows like silver tears. And then slowly Ezra's hand reached out across the mattress. Stay, he said. Please. Dante moved. He shed his jacket somewhere between the edge of the bed and Ezra's body. His tie followed. His shirt. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the heat radiating off Ezra's skin, the way his Omega trembled beneath his touch, the small, desperate sounds escaping Ezra's throat as Dante finally wrapped himself around him. I've got you, Dante murmured against Ezra's hair. I'm not going anywhere. Ezra's fingers clawed at Dante's shoulders. It hurts, I know. The suppressants, they burned everything out. My body doesn't know how to do this anymore. Dante pulled back just enough to look at Ezra's face. Flushed, sweating, beautiful in a way that made Dante's chest ache. Then let me help you remember, he said. Ezra's breath caught. And then he was kissing Dante, not gently, not carefully, but desperately. Like Ezra was drowning, and Dante was the only air left in the world. Dante kissed him back. Slow at first. Grounding. He poured every ounce of restraint he had into that kiss, trying to tell Ezra without words, you are safe. You are wanted. You are mine, but you are also free. Ezra made a sound against his mouth, something between a sob and a moan. His legs wrapped around Dante's waist. His body arched upward, seeking, begging. Easy, Dante whispered. Easy. I don't want easy. Ezra's voice was raw. I want you. I've always wanted you. Even when I was too afraid to say it. Even when I was drowning myself in suppressants just to stay invisible. I wanted you, Dante. Something broke inside Dante's chest. All those months of waiting. All those nights lying beside Ezra, feeling him shift in his sleep, smelling his scent but never pushing, never taking more than Ezra was ready to give. All that restraint. And now Ezra was looking at him like he was the only thing keeping the world from ending. You should have told me, Dante said roughly. You would have done something stupid. Like try to fix me. I did try to fix you. I know. Ezra's lips curved into a faint, trembling smile. That's why I love you. The words hit Dante like a physical blow. Love? Ezra had never said it before. Not like this. Not with his body burning with heat and his eyes wide and honest and terrified of what he had just admitted. Dante kissed him again. Harder this time. Deeper. He poured everything he could not say into that kiss. The fear of losing Ezra, the rage at everyone who had ever made him feel small, the desperate, consuming need to protect this man for the rest of his life. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Say it again, Dante demanded. Ezra's eyes glittered in the darkness. I love you. Again. I love you, Dante. Again. Ezra laughed, a real laugh this time, bright and breathless and beautiful. I'm in heat and you're making me repeat myself like a confession. Because it is a confession. Dante pressed his forehead against Ezra's. And I need to hear it until I believe it. Ezra's hands cupped Dante's face. Gentle. Steady. Despite the heat racking his body, despite the sweat cooling on his skin, despite everything, his hands were steady. Then let me show you, Ezra whispered. And Dante stopped waiting. The storm raged outside for hours. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, silver flashes. Thunder shook the windows. Rain fell in sheets, washing the city clean. But inside the penthouse, there was only Ezra. Dante learned him like a map he had been studying his whole life. Every sound Ezra made, the small gasps, the broken moans, the way he said Dante's name like a prayer. Every touch that made him shudder, gentle pressure against his hips, fingers threading through his damp hair, lips tracing the mark on his throat. The mark. Dante had placed it there months ago, a claiming bite that had healed into silver scar tissue. But now, with Ezra's heat flooding both their systems, the mark seemed to pulse with its own life. Mine, Dante murmured against it. Ezra's whole body trembled. Yours. Say it again. Yours, Dante. I'm yours. I've always been yours. Even when I was hiding. Even when I was pretending to be weak. I was yours. Dante's control snapped. He buried himself in Ezra, not just his body, but his whole being. His scent wrapped around them both, thick and possessive. His hands mapped every inch of Ezra's skin. His lips followed. And Ezra took all of it. Gave back more. Wrapped his legs around Dante's waist and pulled him deeper, closer, until there was no space left between them. Don't stop, Ezra gasped. Please don't stop. I'm not going to stop, Dante promised. Not ever. Hours later, the storm finally began to fade. Dante lay on his back with Ezra sprawled across his chest, boneless and sated. The heat had not fully broken. It would last another day, maybe two, but for now there was peace. Ezra's finger traced lazy patterns against Dante's collarbone. That was, Ezra started, then stopped. What? I don't have words. Dante's chest rumbled with a quiet laugh. That's a first. Ezra lifted his head just enough to glare at him. The effect was ruined by his flushed cheeks and swollen lips. I'm trying to be sincere. I know. Dante brushed a strand of damp hair away from Ezra's forehead. I'm just not used to you being speechless. Ezra considered this for a moment. Then, it felt like coming home. Dante's hand stilled. Not the physical part, Ezra continued quietly. Well, that too. But mostly, he pressed his palm flat against Dante's chest, right over his heart. This, being here, being seen. I spent so many years making myself invisible that I forgot what it felt like to exist. You exist, Dante said. You've always existed. I saw you the moment you handed me that ledger. I saw you before that, actually. In the hallways. At your desk. You thought you were invisible, but He stopped. Ezra's eyes were wide. You what? Dante looked away. It was ridiculous, the most feared alpha in the city, unable to meet his Omega's gaze. But the words felt too large for his mouth. I noticed you, Dante admitted quietly. Before the missing money. Before the marriage. I noticed you, and I told myself it didn't mean anything. You were just an Omega in my building. There were hundreds of them. But none of them sat alone in the break room, reading forensic accounting textbooks during lunch. Dante's lips twitched. None of them corrected their supervisor's math in front of everyone, without even looking up from their work. None of them looked at me like I was just another problem to be solved. Ezra's breath caught. You remember that? I remember everything about you, Ezra. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the storm finally retreating. Rain still tapped against the windows, softer now, almost gentle. Ezra lowered his head and pressed a kiss to Dante's chest. Right over his heart. I'm not going back on suppressants, Ezra said quietly. Dante's arm tightened around him. Good. The heats will be hard. My body is damaged. Vayner said it might take years to fully recover. Then we have years. I might be difficult to live with. Dante snorted. You've been difficult to live with since the day we met. Ezra swatted his chest weakly. I'm being vulnerable. You're being honest. There's a difference. Dante tilted Ezra's chin up so their eyes met. I didn't marry you because you were easy, Ezra. I married you because you were the only person in the world who looked at me and didn't flinch. The only person who told me the truth, even when it was dangerous. The only Omega who ever made me want to be better instead of worse. Ezra's eyes glistened. That's true, Dante finished. Every word. Ezra kissed him then. Soft, slow. A kiss that promised things neither of them knew how to say aloud. When they finally pulled apart, Ezra rested his forehead against Dante's. The next time I go into heat, Ezra murmured, don't make me ask you to stay. Dante's smile was sharp and beautiful and full of teeth. What if I like hearing you beg? I don't beg. You begged beautifully tonight. Ezra's face went red. I did not. You did. Twice. Maybe 3 times. I lost count after you started saying my name like that. Dante. Yes, love. Ezra's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. You can't just. Dante laughed. A real laugh, warm and low. The kind of sound he never made in front of anyone else. I can, he said. I'm your alpha. And I'm your omega, Ezra said softly. Not because the contract says so. Not because the council expects it. Because I chose you. Every single day I choose you. Dante's laughter faded into something softer. More vulnerable. Every single day I choose you too. Outside, the rain stopped. The clouds began to break apart, revealing patches of pale morning sky. Sunlight crept through the windows, painting the bedroom in shades of gold and silver. But neither of them moved. They stayed tangled together, wrapped in sheets in each other, while the city woke up around them. The empire could wait. The meetings, the negotiations, the endless politics, all of it could wait. Because for the first time in both their lives, they had something worth holding on to. And neither of them intended to let go. Then,